Ava, do you want to read to us from Daughters of Smoke and Fire?
Sure. I would like to start by thanking Toronto Public Library for making this event happen. And I really admire Sergio's vision for creating and thinking of this panel. It's been amazing to dig into these two other books. And thank you, Fatima, for moderating this panel. And thank you to our audience for being with us here today. So Daughters of Smoke and Fire is a story of a Kurdish sibling, Layla and Shia. It's mostly Layla's story. She dreams of becoming a filmmaker like you, Anne, but she has a lot of obstacles piling up in front of her, and all sorts of injustice and geopolitical oppression. And while she's trying to figure out her way in life, her brother, who is more of a political activist, disappears. And now it is her responsibility to try to figure out if he's alive or not and what to do about that. In the middle of all of that, someone that Layla thinks could be responsible for her brother's disappearance comes up with a very strange proposal that if you marry me, on paper, I can take you to Canada. So she has to make a lot of decisions in the middle of all of that. But in reality, it's the story of moving from being buried under injustice towards clarity and courage. I want to read just the prologue, but it's only a page, and it's a critical moment in Layla's life. A woman alone on the mountain at dusk. An invisible boot pressed against my throat, making my breath labored and helpless. And yet I couldn't go back and face my parents or my stifled future. Hidden behind the boulder, I hugged my knees and imagined my rage and pain whirling into a wildfire, burning down all the injustices. Could my father have known what was going on? I wanted to tell him, to share this burden with him. My shoulders were already heavy beneath the daily cruelties of living as a woman in La Natawa, the damn place. This fatigue was incurable. The sun had suntered down, disappeared behind Lake Zrebar. A dozen shades of red burst open along the horizon. Below, the narrow, winding asphalt road was the hem around the hill's green skirt, embroidered with clusters of red and yellow wildflowers. The schleer flowers stood elegant and tall, flourishing across the rough Kurdistan plateau, defying borders. I yearned to be a schleer, but I was a garden of anguish, of loathing, of torment. My occupied homeland was a birthplace of death. I stood up, my breath now coming in pants. I wasn't hiding anymore. Bessa, Bess, I shouted, it's enough, enough. I started down the hill in a tumbling run and found myself unable to stop. Despite the chill of the evening, I started sweating. The wind whipped my headscarf and I gained speed. I flapped as if I had wings. As I ran, a wail escaped my chest. I was headed toward the main road, toward the world of men. The streets belonged to them, judgmental men, hypocritical men, their honor dependent on women, men. Cars hurtled around the curve, full of drunk drivers who honked as they spotted me springing down the hillside. They were going too fast for this road, too fast for their sluggish reflexes, and too fast for their old vehicles. A late motor called, careened down the winding road, kicking up dust. The wind roared in my ears. The car and whoever was driving seemed to seek me out as a fellow traveler. I stumbled on a stone, crushing the shiny red poppies in the grass. And as I lurched, my untold stories tumbled inside me like pages ripped from a book and tossed, crumpled into the waste paper bin. An overpowering urge to scream my story, to expel it from beginning to end, seized me. Suddenly, I could see the heads of all those Kurds crushed beneath tanks. Descending the slope at a breakneck pace, my shouts crescendoing, I was unable to stop myself, this crazed woman. A final lunge, and I was airborne. Thank you. I can go first. So, I mean, the assumption is there that if you're from a minority group, then you know everything about that minority group. People usually lose sight of the fact that how diverse and how complex a minority group can be. For me, learning about Kurdish history was an entire process of decolonization. Just because I was raised in Iran doesn't mean I actually knew anything about my own history. Even not my language is not taught to me. So this is what oppressors do. They try to physically erase you, right? So there's this acts of genocide, imprisonment, torture, execution, all of that. But alongside that, and sometimes slowly after that, they start this process of denying your existence. You don't exist. You're just another blah, 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 right? You're not independent. You don't have an independent history or culture. You're just a small portion of us. You are who we tell you you are. And in the kindest way, that would be, yeah, you're part of us. In the most brutal way would be to label you and to demonize you and to present you as a threat to the rest of the people in there. And so in this process of denial or defining you the way they are, you're kind of lost. For me, knowing what it's like to be Kurdish, which Canada offered me the opportunity to do that actually, was the reason. One of the reasons this book took me 10 years was there was so much I had to figure out. And even though I try to decolonize myself as much as I can, I'm not purely, not assimilated. So this was the whole process. And then now that I live in exile, it's now safe for me to go back. How can I write about a place that I can no longer visit? And so really, how intimate am I to these things? The other thing is, there is, like you mentioned, this pressure of representation. You're not just telling your story. Whatever you say is every person of your group's story too. And how do you balance that? The pressure is there. The responsibility is also there, right? You look at political prisoners, you see how the ones that I have interviewed were very confident in saying that this is not just my story. I live to tell. I have to tell this story no matter what. And so if you do now have the opportunity, like myself in Canada, I have a voice, I have a pen, I can write. I am responsible for trying to tell others people's story who shared their story with me while I worked as a journalist or as an activist. So this intimacy is really most of the time not there for me. There are moments when I am writing from my bone, right? Like when they forced me to wear the hijab and I didn't believe in it. And I was young, I wanted to play, I wanted to run around, I wanted to be free. And it felt like a chain, like a shackle, right? When I write about that, that's very intimate. It comes from my heart. But so much of it was been exploring and interviewing. And I'm learning that just researching and reading books and articles aren't enough. And it's really through talking to people who have been through things like that I'm learning. And I'll stop here. Fatima, that question is really $1 million question, and I grappled with it for a long time when I was trying to decide which medium I'm going to use to tell this story. And I found memoirs incredibly limiting. I feel like I wouldn't have permission to dig deep within myself, but also people that I know. And I love the world of fiction because it's a lot less concerned with facts and it's a lot more concerned with truth. So now, after all these years, when I write fiction, I am only thinking about the craft and what's organic to the story. And it no longer matters to me if this happened to me or someone I know, or it didn't happen to me. I don't like the word reality because we like to pretend it's objective, and it's not. So much, even within our own life, our perception of reality changes based on what happens in your body, based on trauma, based on age, based on environment, based on people you hang out with, right? Your reality change. I mean, look at our world. The reason there's so much division is because we have different perceptions of reality, of vaccination, of wearing masks, right? Even science now is not as objective as we used to be. So why should I, when I'm trying to tell this truth and tell a story, limit myself to facts and figures? And what is the purpose of facts? Facts and information are supposed to be then transformed into knowledge, and knowledge is supposed to reshape itself into wisdom. So it's really a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. In the meantime, knowing that most of the people who pick up my book in the Western world would probably be the first time in their entire life that are looking at a novel written by a Kurdish woman, would want to have a better understanding of what it's actually like. So I had to then make this decision of, okay, all the historical events that I'm picking for my novel, whether it's a protest that one of the characters are taking part in, or something that the radio blares on while the family are having a dinner, needs to be based on what actually happened. And that was something that I worked on for such a long time, because that was really a difficult thing to do. Like, something happens that's very important to Kurdish history, but my character is only 5 years old. So how do I convey that to a 5-year-old? So at the end of the day, I think fiction is, stories in general are like the straightest way from human heart to heart. And I think we live in this day and time when we really need this heart-to-heart resuscitation. And so I think you choose a medium. It's either fiction or nonfiction, and then you try your best to work within that role, that tool that you have picked.
What do you want for your readers to take away from your books, and do you see differences in reading practices as between readers in the West and readers in the global South, or readers in the places that you're writing about? Ava, do you want to start us off?
That's another great question that I'm really still trying to figure out the answer to. I feel like as a collective species, we need to be able to enlarge our capacity to bear witness to each other's suffering. I feel we suffer from the tendency to look the other way. And I understand that it is an act of self-preservation, and we do need to preserve ourselves, but what if we collectively worked on our ability to actually stare injustice in the eyes and then take action, as opposed to being overwhelmed by it? So it is certainly a value to have empathy and to see how other people around the world, what they're going through. It resonates so much. I mean, look at these 3 authors, these 3 books, right? There's so much that we have in common. There is so much that our works echoes each other. But if I look away or only look at Kurdish pain, how much am I missing? It's not that I'm doing only a disservice to people in Burma and North Korea. It's also that I'm doing a disservice to myself by forgetting that oppression, injustice, cruelty is not personal. It has been with human and in human history for centuries to come. But where do you draw that balance? How could you expand that awareness maybe a little bit at a time every day, and be able to preserve yourself, to protect yourself, to protect your heart, your human heart, but also look at someone else's suffering and say, I see you, I witnessed that. And even take a step further and see if it's possible to see beyond the suffering. Is there a light beyond the suffering? For my main character, Layla, there is this moment when she is really close to death, when there's a gun pointed to her head and she thinks this is it, this is the end. And she survives that moment. And usually when we are very close to death and we come back to life, our perceptions changes, and it becomes more clear that what actually matters to us. And that's when she realizes that what is happening to the Kurds is not unique to the Kurds. It's happening to also indigenous people in Canada and to so many other people. There has been genocide in Rwanda, in Bosnia, in this and that place. And then she finds this sisterhood, this unity, and in fact, maybe it is really our pain and our suffering that connects us more than our privileges. And that's such a big moment in her life, such a big wake-up call, when she doesn't want to give in anymore, and she doesn't want to just survive anymore. She gains the will to thrive because she now knows she's not alone. So by setting these stories in other part of the world and trying to transmit so much, because it's really, really difficult to write for an audience who knows nothing about you and rarely ever even heard your name. and to even choose fiction for that purpose, because in fiction you can't explain, you can't have endnotes or footnotes, and you should only say what your characters would say, and your characters want to say things that they already know, right? So when these books are there and they give us the opportunity to travel the world and understand the world and understand ourselves better by reading a book set in Asia and in Africa, why not? Why not take advantage of that opportunity? And I know we live in a world where media likes to repeat the same story, where our brain even is wired to like to repeat the same things over and over. I know we don't like necessarily to be challenged. It hurts our ego. But what if we got over it and sat in the safety of our own home in a couch and picked up a book and actually traveled the world? I'm also revising a novel that I wrote, completed about a year and a half ago. But my process of revision is pretty long, and that's really where I learn what the story is and get to dig. This is a love story of an Yazidi couple in Kurdistan who are separated when ISIS attacks, and they go different ways, but then they kind of run into each other basically here in North America, where as refugees. And so it follows their love story, but it also looks at trauma, looks at what it means when you bring your trauma to a country that's already dealing with its own trauma, and what happens when these clash, and what's it like to be a refugee, what is the reality of their lives, and kind of to be an antidote to what politicians are doing, which is they act as if refugees aren't human. They're just canvases that this politician campaigns to, draw votes and that kind of stuff. And if anyone here is listening to this panel and knows an Yazidi, please, and if they're willing and eager to talk to me, please go to avahoma.com and send me an email. I'd love to talk to more people.